I never imagined that sealing off my neighbor's illegal wells would uncover a massive HOA corruption scheme and completely transform the property I inherited. How would you react if you found out your land was secretly being exploited by the very people claiming to protect your community? I nearly dropped my coffee mug when I spotted a massive drilling rig rumbling across the back field. Two men in hard hats were taking measurements while a third marked the ground with bright orange spray paint. I blinked hard, thinking I might still be half asleep, but no, strangers with heavy machinery were absolutely trespassing on my land. "Hey," I shouted, jogging toward them, "what do you think you're doing on my property?" The tallest worker looked up, completely unfazed. "Setting up to drill a well." "A well? On my land? Who gave you permission?" He reached into his pocket and pulled out a stack of folded papers. "Silverwood Lakes HOA. Got all the paperwork right here." I snatched the documents from his hand. Sure enough, there was an official-looking permit with the HOA's logo stamped at the top. According to the document, they had permission to drill water wells on the eastern boundary of my property. "This has to be a mistake," I said. "I never agreed to this." The worker shrugged. "Not our problem, buddy. We just go where they tell us." My grandfather had left me this 5-acre property when he passed away last year. It sat right next to Silverwood Lakes, a high-end neighborhood full of massive homes and even bigger rules. I'd never joined their HOA. My land existed long before their development was even built. "Look, you need to pack up and leave now," I insisted. "I don't care what that paper says. This is private property." The foreman pulled out his phone. "Let me call the HOA president. She can clear this up." 20 minutes later, a sleek black SUV rolled up to my gate. A woman with immaculate hair and oversized sunglasses stepped out. She marched over like she owned the place. "Mr. Callahan, I'm Victoria Grant, president of Silverwood Lakes Homeowners Association." She didn't offer a handshake. "I understand there's some confusion." "There's no confusion," I replied. "These men are trespassing, and I want them off my land, now." Victoria's smile didn't touch her eyes. "Actually, when your grandfather sold the adjacent land to our developers 10 years ago, he signed an easement agreement. During water emergencies, the HOA is permitted to access the aquifer beneath your property. We're currently in the middle of a severe drought, as I'm sure you've noticed." "I've never heard anything about an easement," I said, my stomach nodding. "It's all perfectly legal," she replied, pulling out another document with my grandfather's signature at the bottom. "One emergency well is allowed under Section 5, Paragraph 3. I read the fine print, and she was right. There was an easement, but something felt off. "This says one well, not multiple," I pointed out, noticing several more orange marks scattered across my field. Victoria waved a hand dismissively. "The situation has escalated. Our attorneys have determined that the spirit of the agreement allows for multiple access points during severe shortages." "That's not what it says," I insisted. "Feel free to contact our attorneys," she replied, already turning to leave. "In the meantime, we'll proceed as planned. The community needs water." As I watched her drive away, the workers began unloading even more equipment. Something didn't add up. Sure, it had been dry, but I wouldn't call it a crisis. My own well was working just fine. That night, I couldn't sleep. The noise of machinery under floodlights kept me awake. By morning, they'd finished drilling one well and had already started on a second. I called the county water authority and asked if any emergency had been declared. The clerk sounded puzzled. "No official emergency, sir. We're at Conservation Level 1, just voluntary lawn watering restrictions." Now I was really suspicious. I drove into Silverwood Lakes to look around. For a neighborhood supposedly facing a water crisis, their lawns looked lush and green. Sprinklers were running at several homes, and a landscaping crew was actively filling the community pool. Then I saw the sign by the front entrance. "Coming soon, Silverwood Lakes luxury water features and resident lake." I snapped a picture with my phone. This wasn't about any emergency. They wanted my water for fountains and a man-made lake. When I got home, 3 different drilling teams were now set up on my land. A neighbor, Greg Hamilton from a few blocks over, was watching from my driveway. "Impressive project they're putting in," he said as I approached. "You know about this?" I asked. Greg nodded. "Victoria announced it at the last HOA meeting. Said they finally got permission to tap the aquifer for the new amenities. Property values are expected to rise at least 15% with those water features." My blood boiled. She told me it was for an emergency water shortage. Greg laughed. "Shortage of luxury, maybe. My wife, Karen, is on the landscaping committee. They've been planning this for months." I thanked him for the information and went inside to call a lawyer. Attorney Daniel Harris agreed to see me that same afternoon. "Based on what you've told me," Daniel said after reviewing the documents, "they're clearly exceeding the easement allowance. The agreement permits a single well and only for emergency use." "So I can stop them?" I asked, hopeful. "Yes," he nodded, "but not immediately. We'll need to file for an injunction, which could take a week or longer." He gave me a sympathetic look. "In the meantime, I suggest you document everything. Take photos, record conversations, keep a detailed log of all activities." By the time I returned home, they had finished drilling 3 wells and had already started on a 4th. Workers were now laying pipe across my land, tearing up my garden, and damaging trees that my grandfather had planted decades ago. I took pictures of every inch of the destruction. That's when I noticed something strange. The pipes weren't headed towards Silverwood Lakes. They were going in the opposite direction, toward an open field on the far side of my property. I followed the pipe trail and found survey stakes planted in the ground with a sign that read, "Future site of Westfield Ridge Mall and Entertainment Complex." Were they selling my water to commercial developers? Hands shaking, I took more pictures. That night, I received an official-looking letter from the HOA. It listed numerous supposed violations on my property: overgrown grass, non-compliant fence height, unauthorized structures, along with potential fines totaling thousands of dollars. This was war. But how could I fight against their money, lawyers, and influence? I stared out my window at the drilling rigs lit up in the darkness. The easement mentioned wells, but it said nothing about what happened after those wells were drilled. I started researching at 5 in the morning. From my kitchen window, I watched as Victoria Grant, yes, the HOA president herself, drove onto my property to inspect the drilling progress. 4 wells were now complete, with 3 more marked off. She walked around holding a clipboard, pointing and giving orders like she owned the place. When she saw me watching from the window, she smiled and waved like we were neighbors at a barbecue. The nerve of that woman turned my stomach. After she left, I made a call to a buddy in construction. "Hey, Jake, I need a cement mixer today." "Planning a patio?" he asked. "Something like that," I replied. "Also, how much concrete would it take to fill a vertical shaft about 8 inches wide and 40 feet deep?" Jake whistled. "That's oddly specific. You're talking about a lot of material. What exactly are you up to?" "Just exploring my options," I said. While waiting for Jake to drop off the mixer, I drove to 3 different hardware stores in neighboring towns, buying bags of quick-setting concrete at each. I didn't want anyone connecting my purchases to my address. Back home, I carefully read the easement agreement for the 10th time. It granted the HOA permission to drill during emergencies, but said nothing about what I could or couldn't do with my land afterward. There was no clause guaranteeing them ongoing access or rights for maintenance. As I was mixing my first batch of concrete, Laurie Hamilton, Jake's wife, showed up at my door. "I heard you had questions about our water project," she said, trying to peer past me into the garage. "As a member of the landscaping committee, I just wanted to clear up any confusion." "That's thoughtful," I replied, casually blocking her view. "Maybe you can explain why Victoria told me this was an emergency situation, when in reality you've been planning luxury water features." Laurie shifted uncomfortably. "Well, it's complicated. The drought is real, but we're also planning ahead for community improvements." She lowered her voice. "Between us, the board's been collecting special assessment fees for years to pay for these upgrades. Members would be furious if nothing spectacular came of it." "And the shopping mall?" I asked. Her eyes widened. "What shopping mall?" "The one they're piping water to, across my land." Laurie looked genuinely confused. "Our plans are strictly within Silverwood Lakes, nothing about selling water elsewhere." "Interesting." So the HOA board was keeping secrets, even from their own committees. I thanked Laurie for stopping by and closed the door before she could ask what was in my garage. That night, I waited until 2 a.m., after the crews had gone home and the security guard they'd posted was asleep in his truck. Quietly, I wheeled the cement mixer out to the first completed well. Working as quickly and silently as I could, I poured batch after batch of thick gray concrete into the shaft. It disappeared into the darkness like it belonged there. To help it set around irregular shapes, I tossed in broken chunks of scrap metal, old pipes and fittings. Once cured, it would be nearly impossible to drill through the mess. I finished the first well just before dawn and covered the site so no one would notice until it was too late, until they tried to install pumping equipment. The next day, the crews returned and continued drilling as usual, completely unaware of what I'd done. I repeated the process for the next 2 nights, sealing off each completed well with cement and metal. On the 4th morning, I was awakened by furious pounding on my front door. Victoria stood there with 2 men in suits. "We need to talk now," she demanded, pushing her way into my house without waiting for an invitation. "Our crews report that the first 3 wells have been sabotaged." I feigned surprise. "Sabotaged? How?" "Don't play dumb," she snapped. Someone poured concrete into the shafts. The drilling company can't proceed until it's cleared." I shrugged. "That's terrible news, but I don't see how it concerns me." "It's your property," Victoria fumed. "You're responsible for securing the work site." "Actually," I said calmly, "I never gave permission for any of this. The easement doesn't make me responsible for site security." One of the suited men stepped forward. "I'm Andrew Blake, the HOA's attorney. This sabotage has already cost the association over $50,000. We'll be adding that to the violations notice you received." "Speaking of that notice," I said, "I've been photographing my property weekly for years. I can prove those violations didn't exist until your crews started tearing up my land." The second man spoke. "Mr. Callahan, I'm Detective Harris. Vandalism on this scale could qualify as a felony offense." "That's interesting," I replied, "because I've been documenting everything happening on my property." I pulled out my phone and showed them photos of the pipes stretching to the mall development site. "I'm curious why emergency drought wells are connected to a commercial construction zone. The County Water Authority told me no emergency has been declared." Victoria's face went pale. She glanced nervously at her attorney. "Oh," I added, "I've also been recording our conversations." That wasn't entirely true, but they didn't know that. "Like when you admitted to exceeding the single well limit in the easement agreement." Detective Harris turned to Victoria, raising his eyebrows. "This is ridiculous," she sputtered. "We have legal rights to access that aquifer for one emergency well." "Right," I corrected her. "One well, not 7, and certainly not for fountains, fake lakes, or selling water to commercial developers." Robert leaned over and whispered something into Victoria's ear. She looked increasingly uneasy. "Perhaps we can discuss a compromise," she finally said. "I don't think so," I replied. "My attorney already filed for an emergency injunction, and both the County Water Board and the Environmental Protection Office are very interested in unauthorized aquifer access." Detective Harris scribbled a note in his pad. "I think I need to look into these allegations before continuing any vandalism investigation." After they left, I sat down at the kitchen table, hands trembling. I had stood my ground, but this fight was far from over. Victoria wouldn't back down easily, not with that much money on the line. Later that afternoon, I spotted one of the drilling workers snapping photos of my garage, where I kept the cement mixer. Hours later, I noticed an unfamiliar car creeping past my property, slowing as it approached. Someone was watching me. Then my phone rang. It was Daniel, my lawyer. "Good news and bad news," he said. "The judge is interested in your case, but we won't get a hearing until next week." "And the bad news?" "I found something troubling. Silverwood HOA has deep connections with the county zoning board. They've fast-tracked permits that normally take months. Looks like they've got friends in high places." "So they've got the system rigged," I said, exhaling. "Pretty much. We need stronger evidence of their real intentions, and something that'll draw public attention." After hanging up, I walked my property line, thinking. 3 wells were sealed, but 4 more were still in progress. I couldn't keep playing defense forever. That's when I saw it. a large water tanker truck filling up at one of the completed wells. Bold letters on the side read, Evergreen Development Corporation. I grabbed my phone and snapped photos. Then I followed the truck at a safe distance. It led me straight to the empty field where construction had already started on the mall. Workers were unloading water into large storage tanks. They weren't even waiting for the pipeline to be finished. They were already selling my water. I immediately called Daniel and sent him the pictures. "This might be the evidence we need," he said. "I'm contacting the environmental regulators right now." When I got back home, I found Victoria and Andrew Blake waiting in my driveway. "We're prepared to offer you compensation," Victoria said with a forced smile. "That's generous," I replied sarcastically, "considering you're selling my water for a whole lot more than that." Andrew cleared his throat. "We're also willing to waive all HOA violation fees." "I'm not part of your HOA," I reminded them. "You have no authority over my land." Victoria's fake smile disappeared. "Listen carefully," she said coldly. "This project will happen, whether you cooperate or not. The board has invested too much to turn back now. If you keep interfering, there will be consequences." "Are you threatening me?" I asked. "I'm being realistic," she replied. "We have resources and connections you can't imagine. Don't force us to use them." As they drove off, I stood motionless in the driveway, not intimidated, but burning with resolve. I noticed Greg Hamilton watching from across the street. He crossed cautiously and leaned in. "Be careful," he warned. "Victoria doesn't play fair." Last year, a homeowner who challenged her landscaping restrictions suddenly got hit with building code violations, nearly lost his house. "Thanks for the heads up," I said, "but I'm not backing down." That night, as I prepared to cement another well, I heard movement outside. Flashlight beams swept across my yard. They had security guards now, patrolling around the clock. How was I supposed to finish what I'd started with them watching? And what would Victoria do next to try to force me into submission? The stakes were rising fast. I needed a new strategy, and soon. My hands shook as I looked through the photos of my land being torn apart. 7 wells. Not 1, not 3. 7 illegal wells tapping water from under my land. I couldn't sleep. My mind raced with fury and frustration. What could one person do against an entire HOA board? At 3 a.m., I shot upright in bed. I knew exactly what I had to do. I called my cousin Tyler, who also worked in construction. "I need a cement mixer," I whispered. "No questions." By dawn, we had a plan. I hit up 3 different hardware stores in separate towns, picking up bags of quickset cement at each to avoid drawing attention. No paper trail, no red flags. Tyler showed up with his mixer truck just after the neighborhood quieted down from the morning rush. "You sure about this?" he asked, eyeing the drilling rig scattered across my back acreage. I nodded, pulling on a pair of work gloves. They left me no choice. This is my land, my grandfather's legacy. I'm not letting them steal it. We started with the newest well, the one furthest from the road. I made the first batch of cement extra thick, mixing in rebar for good measure. The gray sludge poured down into the shaft with a satisfying gurgle. 1 down, 6 to go. By noon, we had sealed 4 of the wells. The 5th was trickier. They'd already started installing pipe. Tyler helped me pull it free before we filled that hole, too. "Someone's coming," Tyler warned, pointing toward a rising cloud of dust on the access road. "Keep going," I said, mixing faster. "We need to finish." As we poured cement into the 6th shaft, I heard car doors slam. Victoria's voice rang out like a blade through the air. "Stop what you're doing right now!" I turned. She was stomping toward us, her designer heels sinking into the dirt. David Jensen and 2 other HOA board members hustled to keep up. "What exactly do you think you're doing?" she demanded, her face a deep, furious red. I kept pouring. "Home improvement," I said casually. "On our wells?" she shrieked. "On my property," I corrected. "Wells that exceed the single emergency access point permitted by the easement." David stepped forward. "You have no idea who you're dealing with. The HOA will bury you in legal fees." "Interesting choice of words," I replied, watching cement swirl down the shaft. Victoria pulled out her phone. "I'm calling the police." "Please do," I said, grabbing a folder from my truck. "Then you can explain why you approved 7 wells when your easement allows for 1, and why you're pumping that water into a private amenity project." Her finger froze above the screen. "What are you talking about?" I handed her the printouts, blueprints I'd photographed through David's office window, labeled clearly. "Board Members Exclusive Retreat and Water Features Project." "Doesn't sound like emergency access to me," I said. David lunged for the documents, but Tyler stepped between us. "Careful now," I warned, steady and calm. "I also have audio of your threats, the ones about what would happen to me if I didn't cooperate. My lawyer found those especially interesting." The 3rd well finished curing as we talked. Tyler fired up the mixer for the final one. "You can't do this," Victoria hissed. The community needs emergency water," I interrupted, "not a luxury resort for board members." Just then, a white county utility truck rolled up behind the HOA cars. A man stepped out in a county water authority uniform, followed closely by a local police officer. "Perfect timing," I said, waving them over. "I called earlier morning. Unauthorized aquifer access." Victoria's expression shifted from rage to panic. "This is a private HOA matter," she insisted. "Actually," the water authority said, flipping through his clipboard, "drilling into the aquifer requires county-level approval, permits you don't appear to have. And according to these property maps, you've also been operating outside your easement on privately owned land." The officer stepped forward. "We've received reports of trespassing and property damage. I'll need everyone to step back while we assess." David tried to speak, but stumbled over his words as the realization set in. Their entire scheme was crumbling. I turned back to the 7th and final well, watching the last batch of cement disappear down into the shaft. The end of it, sealed. "Officer," I said, handing over my file, "I have full documentation showing the HOA exceeded their legal authority and has been using my land without consent." As Victoria and David began arguing with the officials, I stepped back and, finally, for the first time in days, breathed. Tyler finished cleaning the mixer. Those wells are sealed for good, he said, wiping his hands. I turned to the HOA board members still standing there. So are your private water park plans. Victoria's glare could have melted steel. This isn't over. The police officer stepped between us. Ma'am, I'll need you and the other board members to come down to the station to answer some questions about the unauthorized wells. As they were escorted away, I noticed neighbors gathering along the edge of my property, whispering, pointing, watching. For the first time during this entire nightmare, I felt something new, not about the HOA, but about my future here. The wells were sealed, but I had no idea what the fallout would be. 3 weeks passed in a whirlwind of chaos. I was jolted awake one morning by the sound of a news van pulling up outside my house. Camera crews followed me to the grocery store. Neighbors stopped talking the moment I walked by. My mailbox overflowed, some letters full of threats, others full of gratitude. You're trending on social media, Daniel, my lawyer, said during one of our morning calls. They're calling you the Cement Avenger. I groaned. I just wanted to protect my land. Well, you did more than that, he replied. The county investigation uncovered something big. I clicked over to the local news website. The headline made my jaw drop. Sunset Ridge HOA scandal. Board sold water rights during fake drought. According to the article, Victoria Grant and the HOA board fabricated a water emergency to justify drilling on my property. Their real plan was to sell water to developers working on a massive commercial project 2 miles away. The so-called members-only retreat was nothing more than a cover story. My phone rang non-stop. Reporters, attorneys, even the mayor. I need you at tonight's emergency town hall, the mayor said. The community wants answers. I almost didn't go. What could I possibly say to a furious crowd? But at 7 p.m., I found myself walking into a packed community center. The room fell silent. To my surprise, many residents nodded respectfully. An older woman patted the seat next to her. "I knew your grandfather," she whispered as I sat down. The meeting was utter chaos. Former board members pointed fingers at each other. Residents demanded refunds for emergency water fees. County officials laid out violation after violation. Then the doors flew open. Victoria stormed in, expensive attorney by her side. "This is a witch hunt. Everything we did was to protect property values." "You mean your bank account?" someone yelled back. Victoria's eyes locked on me. She pointed dramatically. "This person destroyed community property. They should be arrested." The mayor stood. "Ms. Grant, those wells were drilled without permits on private land. The county has already ruled." Her lawyer tried to argue, but the evidence kept piling up. The County Water Authority director presented documents showing payments made from development firms to a private consulting company registered in Victoria's name.
If this had gone unchecked, he explained, showing maps of the aquifer, we estimate the water table could have been depleted by 23% in the first year alone. The damage could have been irreversible for the entire region. A stir rose from the back of the room. Sarah Hamilton pushed through the crowd, dragging her husband David by the arm. "Tell them," she said, forcing him toward the microphone. David looked like he hadn't slept in a week. "Victoria promised us all a cut," he said. "The drought wasn't real. We made it up to justify the emergency." The room exploded. Meeting minutes were produced showing the HOA board had voted to manufacture the crisis. Financial records exposed exactly where the money went. By midnight, the county commissioners made it official. Victoria and 3 board members would face criminal charges. The HOA charter was suspended pending a full legal overhaul. I slipped out quietly while the room buzzed with shouting and accusations. I was exhausted, physically, emotionally, completely, and uncertain what came next. 2 months passed in a blur of paperwork, legal consultations, and solitude. Then, one Saturday morning, I opened my front door and found a group of neighbors waiting. "We need to talk about your land," said a woman who introduced herself as the new head of the Neighborhood Transition Committee. My stomach dropped. "I'm not selling," I said flatly. "We don't want you to," she replied. "We want to make things right." Their proposal was simple. The back portion of my property, where the illegal wells had been drilled, would become a community nature preserve, with my permission. I would retain full ownership, but a conservation easement would protect the land from future misuse. "The cement?" I asked cautiously. "Stays," she said, smiling, "as a reminder of what happens when people abuse power." 4 months later, I stood in disbelief. Volunteers worked across the old drilling sites, planting native trees and restoring damaged soil. Each sealed well cap now had a bronze plaque telling a small part of the story, my story, of what had happened there. Sarah Hamilton approached me, holding 2 bottles of water. Her husband, now serving community service hours, was busy pulling invasive weeds nearby. "The Water Conservation Center is fully funded," she said, showing me a set of finalized architectural drawings for a small education center. "Construction starts next spring." I looked across the land my grandfather left me, now a place of growth, memory, and purpose. And for the first time in a long while, I smiled.
We're naming it after your grandfather, if that's okay. I nodded, watching children carefully arrange smooth river stones around a new rain garden. "The county hydrologist says your actions saved the aquifer," Sarah Hamilton continued. "The new HOA charter includes strict water conservation rules. No board will ever be able to do this again." Nearby, a reporter from American Environmental Today snapped photos. "Would you share your story for our cover?" she asked. "People need to know they can stand up to corruption." Before I could answer, a sleek black luxury SUV roared past the edge of my property. It was Victoria Grant. She no longer lived in Sunset Ridge after pleading guilty to fraud, but there she was, slowing down just long enough to glare at the community project before speeding off in a cloud of dust. "She still doesn't get it," Sarah sighed beside me. "This was never about money or property values. It was about doing what's right." As the afternoon light faded into warm evening tones, neighbors gathered around the largest sealed well cap for the official preserve dedication. The mayor stepped forward and handed me a small golden key to the information kiosk. "Sometimes," he said to the crowd, "it takes just one person's courage to remind the rest of us what community truly means." I looked out over the land that had once been my grandfather's quiet retreat. Now it buzzed with new life. Bird watchers with binoculars, children learning about watersheds, families strolling along nature paths. "I never wanted to fight with my neighbors," I said, stepping forward. "I just wanted to protect what belonged to me and to him." An older man in the front row nodded solemnly. "And in doing so," he said, "you protected what belonged to all of us, too." The cement had hardened over those illegal wells, but something else had softened: hearts, minds, and the definition of what it meant to be a neighbor. Each well cap now stood like a quiet monument, a symbol of standing up for what's right, even when you're standing alone. As twilight settled over the preserve, I took the new path home, the one that curved gently around the edge of my private land. Someone had placed a small wooden sign at the border: "Thank you for teaching us the difference between taking and sharing." My throat tightened. My grandfather would have liked that. Sometimes, I thought, you have to seal something shut to open something better.